This is an RNZ podcast.
23 minutes to 10 is the time here on RNZ National, or as we call it around these parts, midweek Mediawatch o'clock. Hello, Colin Peacock.
Hi there, Emil.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I've had an awful lot of peanuts. I'm very full of peanuts, yeah.
That's good. I've been asking people throughout I'm going to put you on the spot, Cole. I've been asking people throughout this evening, if you weren't doing what you do, what would you be doing?
I would be probably unemployed, sitting at home, staring at a computer, writing about the news.
Were you a journalist from the beginning? You always wanted to do this?
Well, I haven't really done any other job, but I mean, more than that, I heard you ask people, what career would you be? At this point in history, I would have hoped that I wouldn't have to have a career or a job. Like robots are supposed to do it all, and aren't we supposed to be infinitely wealthy from mining asteroids or something? And no one has to work?
They're just scraping copyrighted materials, Colin.
Yes, that is something else. Listening to I think the Rest is Entertainment podcast, Richard Osman having his stuff scraped by it. Some interviews on Morning Report earlier in the week, the Society of Authors talking about it. Just wretched stuff. I mean, horrible.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's certainly not the utopia we may have expected. All right, let's talk media. Last Wednesday for Midweek Media Watch, I talked to Hayden about the latest on this ongoing takeover battle at NZME. That was a week after talking to you about it. And there is more to up. This is a fast-moving story, Cole. There are more updates.
Yes, it is. Well, sort of fast-moving. It is kind of rumbling. We are talking about this almost every week now at the top of the slot, so much so that I almost fear that Hayden might come up with some sort of musical sting that other people might then put a dance mix under, and we all know where that leads. But
sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, it is going on, but it is significant stuff. It's a big move in the media world. So 2-second recap. It's NZME, publishers of the Herald and owner of News Talk ZB and other things. Its board is being targeted by activist shareholder James Grennan, a billionaire or almost, from Canada. He's got just under a 10% stake, but claims to have others backing him such that he could install a new board and effectively take control and change the direction of the company. So for one thing that is a concrete development, the shareholders meeting where all this was to be decided has been moved back a few days. It'll now be in the first week of June. And a quick clarification, actually, last Sunday on Mediawatch, I referred to an article all about this by Rebecca Howard at Newsroom. She is, in fact, Rebecca Howard at Business Desk, so apologies to them. Garth Bray, formerly of Fair Go, got in touch with me to point that out. When Fair Go corrects you, kind of... Yeah. You don't ignore that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he did it very politely, and thank you for that, Garth. And there's also an excellent article about activist shareholders in NZX companies, also on Business Desk, by Rebecca Stevenson, that I'd recommend to those who have the appropriate subscriptions. And as Hayden mentioned to you last week when you talked about it, this exchange of letters is how this seems to have been going. James Grennan not really willing to be interviewed, but letters get sent to the company puts them on the NZX website and then responds with carefully worded statements, which then prompts other people in the media to say a little bit. So now NZME is saying in its latest response that it has had a third structure for governorship proposed by James Grennan and fellow activist shareholders. And NZME directors have then hit back in a fairly lengthy statement about, really setting out what they think is wrong or risky for the company about what they call his minority bid for control. They really hit back at the assertion that they haven't performed well, or NZME under their guidance hasn't performed well in recent years. We have, when you compare it to other companies in the Trans-Tasman area, and also the quality journalism, they're making this plain. It's central to NZME's long-term sustainability, they say. And this is a quick quote. NZME has broad audience and we have to maximise revenue. We must produce content which appeals to a diverse range of perspectives. We call it internally, they say, the business of journalism. So that's pointing things back at Grennan and say, they think that's important, and by imputation, he probably doesn't.
That's a really interesting line. Does it throw a cat among the pigeons in this bid for control, do you think?
Well, it does put that journalism aspect of the Herald and ZB News right at the heart of it in a way that James Grennan hasn't, and the shareholders will have to think about that. For James Grennan has said the Herald and any influence on it, that's a side issue for him. The company is bigger than that. Of course, that property division, One Roof, is the one that the company, whether James Grennan takes over or associated board members take control or not, that's one they might want to split off and maximise the revenue from. But yeah, the board is saying articles on topics that are important to the readers and subscribers, that's the important thing. So they reckon, that they point to, as they say, the quality of journalism debate, this is another quote, is very different from the choice of political leaning. So that's really a direct dig at the preoccupations of James Grennan, such as they are known in public, and also that website, The Centrist, which I know you talked about with Hayden, that they kind of feel the preoccupations of that, if it was to influence the news, which they say is so central to the company, then that would damage it and not be at all good for the company under their leadership.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of The Centrist, a lot of people analysing this situation have zeroed in on The Centrist at this website for clues about James Grennan's opinions. What do you make of that? Is that is it fair to analyse this website and infer that we know what he thinks about the world and what the Herald might turn into if he takes control, do you think?
Yeah, that is kind of hard to know. James Grennan is not running the show now. It's another Canadian expat who is running that, but he did help set it up. And of course, James Grennan doesn't do interviews with anyone, so it's kind of a shame that we can't get close to that. But I mean, it's a confusing issue because some people say, well, okay, so it challenges the mainstream media and presents alternative perspectives, so what? And that's kind of true. But a shout out here, I think, to Charlie Mitchell of Stuff. He did a very good kind of explainer of it called This is for Stuff in the Weekend Papers, so you'll find it online. Decoding the Rightward Lean of the Centrist is the headline. And he goes through a lot of the content to kind of pick it out. So rather than picking on individual pieces, which would seem to, people have looked at them and say, aha, this must be what Grennan believes, and it's clearly a pretty alternative sort of perspective. But this is Charlie Mitchell's conclusion. The Centrist is not simply the New Zealand news, concise and curated with some information on the other side of stories that we were not being told, which is the way Grennan has described it. Charlie Mitchell says it's the systematic promotion of specific economic and social views that happen to align with one political faction under the guise of aggregation. So that's kind of difficult language, but he's trying to be extremely precise, but I think that's fair. And yeah, have a read of the piece, and I think it does kind of sum up what's in the Centrist and what might point to the leanings of both James Grennan and the shared perspectives of other people he would like to, elevate to the governorship of NZME.
So various salvos then in this ongoing sort of war of words. Any response to the board's criticisms from James Grennan?
Yeah, well, James Grennan told the New Zealand Herald that he thinks the response from NZME indicates it's, in his words, run out of ideas, and that might have also been a reference to the pushing back a few days of that meeting. I think he thinks they haven't really got or done much to defend criticisms of their record in charge. These governors also claims that he partly backpedaled on that they, or the chief executive in particular, was too well paid for what they did and how they performed. Interestingly, on that Business Desk, which is part of NZME itself, they've got a column called On the Money, which quotes an anonymous source, an insider, as saying that NZME's chair, Barbara Chapman, has never even met representatives from the larger shareholder in NZME, and people saying, you've got to be kidding me, with stronger language than that, saying really this is perhaps a weakness in the way the board has operated, that there has been a distance between them and significant shareholders. But also the shareholder Troy Bowker, who's a Grennan ally and floated, I think, in the latest proposals by Grennan as one of the possible directors. He reacted pretty strongly in the Herald to Barbara Chapman, describing him as someone with views or who's made comments that she thinks would not be suitable for a company that needs to appeal to a wide range of perspectives in its news. Bowker told the Herald he was, gobsmacked to be criticised by the board in this way and thinks this is very unfair, and he believes in a lot of perspectives. But this is a guy who's courted controversy. He had to step away from the Hurricanes after getting involved with Sir Ian Taylor about issues around Te Ao Māori and so on, offended the team, TJ Paranara. This, and I think this is what Barbara Chapman is pointing to in that letter, saying this is stuff that could, if it happened at NZME, with him in a governor, in a director's position, this sort of thing could happen here.
Well, when did you say that meeting had been postponed till?
3rd of June.
3rd of June.
It was supposed to be the end of this month.
All right. Well, we'll certainly have more to chat about around about that time. Let's move on. Let's talk a bit about this. Well, this has been a very interesting story. The controversy around the Green MP Benjamin Doyle's past social media posts. And this has been quite a tricky one for media to cover. The media have copped quite a lot of flack, actually, for their coverage of this story.
Yeah, or in fact, the lack of it or the lateness of it, as some people see it. So I first became aware of this on X, formerly Twitter. There were posts in the weekend, people sharing screenshots of from his personal Instagram account that have now been sort of mentioned in the news. These are images that feature Ben Doyle's own child, we believe, or one child that people think is Ben Doyle's child. It's sort of late 2023. But most of the people sharing this were expressing outrage about this term, bussy, in relation to these. That's part of Benjamin Doyle's own Instagram handle. The people posting this and sharing it online and getting noticed were linking this to his support for puberty blockers. And also because Benjamin Doyle has commented on the issues of early childhood as the Green spokesperson on that, on government changes. So these were all things being linked to these posts by people who shared them across social media. So when I saw that, I thought, look, it won't be long before people, making comment about this will elevate these to the news. But all sorts of assumptions were being made, conclusions about the images and the languages being used. And it was clearly going to be one that, if it was to be reported fairly and accurately, was going to be really difficult if that became, if they were judged newsworthy.
Well, I mean, the media have been accused of failing to bring this to light, including from some very senior sources. Winston Peters has been talking about this, saying the mainstream media is refusing to ask questions about this. What do you make of that criticism?
Yeah, well, he did that in the weekend. He went on social media urging the media to ask questions about it. That pretty much guaranteed it would get greater coverage and prompted the Greens to hit back and hold their own media conference for the journalists in the Parliamentary Press Gallery, which of course, has its own kind of momentum once stories are raised there. Winston Peters, called his own press conference. He also, this is another interesting trend, that the party, New Zealand First, posted their own footage of his encounter with journalists, and it's headlined, "Why I'm asking mainstream media, why won't you do your job and question the Greens?" Here's a little piece of that press conference as posted online.
Why have the 52 posts been taken down? Have you seen them? You journalists would have asked every other member of Parliament. If it had been a white man, you'd have asked them thousands of questions. Not a word, not a syllable, not a sound, not a mutter, not a murmur. And you think that's journalism? Sorry, I'm going to get you to do your job.
Yeah, and then Jenna Lynch on 3 News said, maybe an irony here, but when they wanted to ask questions about Mr. Peters himself, he wasn't keen.
You've asked us to ask questions about this to other parties. Can you please answer questions to yourself? Mr. Peters.
Walking off from media
Mr. Peters.
before swiftly calling another press conference to address his concerns.
I was alarmed when I saw it, and some of the words and descriptions used there are most concerning, and I'm just asking, how is this explained?
I mean, the substance of the point that Peters is making, though, is it true that the issue? I mean, you see that you found out about it on Twitter X. I did as well, and it was some time before you saw coverage of this wider story in the mainstream media.
Yes.
So is there a point to his criticisms there?
Yes, well, true. It's definitely true that it wasn't reported in mainstream news media immediately. It wasn't till earlier this week, probably Monday. But it's not true that they were being ignored or not considered. In fact, there's an excellent timeline and roundup of this by David Fisher, the Herald's investigative journalist. I think it's online at the moment, might even be in the paper tomorrow, I'm not sure. But yeah, those who have a subscription can look at that. And it makes it clear that, I mean, there's a lot to explain here because people are confused about what might be wrong, what might be outrageous or just confusing, the terminology, the images and so on. But it was being looked at. And media were right to be cautious because those screenshots, they could be false, they could be out of context. Plenty of people out there motivated to do so because of their disapproval of either Benjamin Doyle himself or Green Party policy. Remember that, just as for example, the story about that there were videos that may show Tory whānau under the influence around Wellington, and this was something she was going to have to answer for. And in fact, she did respond to that possibility. Those videos have never cropped up, and it looks like that was mischievous muckraking. So every reason to be cautious and not to be caught out by that, particularly where these images are something that require, a bit of explanation or understanding and could easily be taken out of context, even if they appear outrageous, even if they appear as some people thought there was this huge red flag that it might involve the sexualization of children. That is yet to be shown to be the case. So I think every right to be careful about this. Also, Winston Peters' own comments, for example, in his post urging the media to take the story on, he described Benjamin Doyle as someone placed in Parliament to sabotage ethical beliefs our society stands for. And that's a sort of statement that really can have real-world consequences. And as Richard Harmon, the veteran journalist, pointed out, maybe the media hasn't run the story because journalists do remember the Christchurch creche case, and I think that is a good point.
There is, it's fair to say, though, legitimate public interest in this story.
Yep. Yeah, and indeed, because while some say, Doyle is being victimised because of their own identity or stuff that should just be personal, being dragged into a puberty blockers political debate, that's something New Zealand First has a policy position on. There is a legitimate public interest. They are a Green MP and that spokesman on early childhood education. But Benjamin Doyle has also made gender a political issue. For example, on the Green's own Instagram party account, there's a clip of Benjamin Doyle speaking at a rally in Parliament last weekend and saying this.
Let's make HRT available to everybody who requires it, and puberty blockers on demand. According to the census, the rainbow vote is 5% of the population, but we know it is more than that. Our vote can determine the next government. We will use our voice now and at the next election to make this a one-term government.
Green Party policy is that gender-affirming healthcare, puberty blockers is healthcare and should be available. It's not quite the same thing as puberty blockers on demand. And in fact, there's an article about that rally and that debates about that very issue. Mary Agee wrote that one that's up on the RNZ site. So that's a debate that's going on. He's linked to it. But as you could hear there, the comments about, a rainbow vote could be determining the outcome of an election, that kind of makes you a bit of a political target, saying quite, bold things like that. So, Benjamin Doyle is, clearly seeking support on behalf of his party. So, no surprise that, he's being interrogated, if you will, about, these posts.
I'll tell you what, Cole, this has been a slightly strange story from my point of view, hearing the word bussy in so many news bulletins.
Yeah, because when that song that you played that you were unaware contained that term, that is an angle on the story, right, that people need to know. I was sitting in a room watching what I thought was quite a good exploration of it by Mikey Sherman, TVNZ political editor, kind of, because hard work explaining this in less than 2.5 minutes, such that the comments of politicians and party leaders indeed make sense. But, the person I watched that said, I still don't understand this. What's wrong? What needs to be answered for here? So it is complicated and has to be taken step by step. And if certain people had their way, what they saw as red flags in the media jumping to sort of publicise any of those, that probably wouldn't be helpful. And, there will be more to come on the story, and maybe we'll get a clearer picture of what those posts really meant, or if there is anything to worry about. We don't know. But at the moment, I think by and large the mainstream media has reported it fairly and accurately and not rushed into, doing it in a hurry that might have led the wrong conclusions to be drawn.
Let's finish off by talking about this BSA decision, which I found really, really interesting. The BSA rarely comes down on a media organisation as heavily as it did here. A fine for the 3 News broadcaster, which is very rare, so the misstep must have been very bad. Yeah, so
it's interesting because, as you say, it's unusual for these fines to be issued. It's $3,000, which is the award, which in itself isn't obviously a huge amount of money, but we have the system such that people don't go to court and end up with huge legal bills and so on. So that actually is a sign they saw it as serious. So this was a special investigation by Stuff, which of course produces 3 News, broadcast on 3 News. It was actually 2 news pieces. The first was about a trip that Ash and its director took to Australia, because Ash is seen as, perhaps, being on side with vaping as a supportive of being a less harmful solution, which is controversial for other groups, and that their director had had the trip partly paid for by a contact in Australia. But then there was a second piece as well about students now not taking part in Ash's survey because of concerns about their stance. So all this makes Ash look, a bit bad, and could have harmed their reputation. So in the end, the BSA said, look, the broadcaster did not make reasonable efforts to ensure the accuracy of this, reporting important context, which would have significantly altered views, and that's why they came down with this very rare award of costs both to the complainant and to the Crown.
Yeah, I mean, they really savaged these reports, didn't they? I think the decision was like 46 pages long, and that $3,000 award to the Crown, it, as you say, it doesn't sound like much money, but I think the maximum the BSA can award is $5,000. So
yeah. I mean, the length of that is that is a long one, but some of them are. But the thing is, there's interesting things here. They requested the reporter's interview with the subject, Mr. Udan, the Ash director. Now that's fairly rare. So they say, look, this was a 30-minute discussion, and what they saw then in the reports they thought was not fair, and that then to compound that, Ash was not given accurate opportunity to respond to the allegations of other people. So that's part of the problem. But also the decision says the director, he says, this is actually disputed by 3 News, but that he thought he was just doing a fact-finding chat, and he knew it was being a video call being recorded, but did not know it was all going to be on the record. 3 News thinks that's not right. It would be reasonable to have considered the opposite. But he certainly didn't think that what he said was going to end up being his comment about his organisation and his conduct being at the centre of a story. So it's a lesson to journalists that you just be absolutely clear why you're talking to people and what it is. And another little angle here, he thought he was doing background for something on Stuff, didn't realise it was going to be a kind of TV news bulletin as well, or that's the testimony they've given in the consideration of this report.
Yeah, it is a fascinating decision, that one. Colin Peacock, always nice to chat to you for Midweek Media Watch, and we'll catch you again in a couple of weeks.
Sure, I'll be here. Look forward to it.
That is Colin Peacock, one half of the Media Watch team who pop by at around about this time for Midweek Media Watch every Wednesday.